I really spend my time looking at photos of like desserts. So it really helps if you're making something to have like reference photos, just so like you know how things look like. So I got really hungry while I was doing this. Trust me, I really want to go get some dessert. But I'm gonna stop sharing that and let's share with okay. So let's everyone see this screen. Oh, I lost everyone. Ah, there you are. Okay, cool. So, okay, that's good. So, I can't really see everyone that clearly just because of how my screens are. So, if I ask for anything, if you're not, I might not like notice. So, feel free to interrupt whenever throughout the whole tutorial, and we can go for there from there. So it's 3:10, so we're just gonna start. So if you have Blender open, this will be the first interface that you come through to with. And for now, we're just gonna click General. So that just opens a general workspace. And so there's a lot on the page here. So how I structure the tutorials to go through is we are just gonna cycle through everything. So whenever we get to a specific part, we sort of pause and kind of look at it a little. But just for starters, there's different workspaces in Blender. So the popular one that you most likely be in from the beginning is the layout. And then there's one for modeling. You just click that. There's one for sculpting, which I really wish I was good at sculpting because I've seen people like really make like detailed busts and like figures out of sculpting. So if that's your thing, we'll go through how to use some of these brushes here. There's UV editing, which we'll come to later. There's like texture paint, shading, animation, rendering, compositing, scripting. So if you know how to code, this would be a good addition to it. But for now, we're just gonna be in the layout. And so if you move your scroll wheel up and down, you will zoom in and out. And if you press down on that middle mouse button and you move around, you see you start to like orbit around it. So this really helps you to be able to move around. And if you hold down shift while pressing that button, you can see like you can drag your screen. So that kind of adds a little bit of control. And right clicking will always show what is like a context menu. So then these will change depending on what you're working on and how you're working. And a few tools that are useful are these over here. So if I select this by clicking on it, this cube, and I click this, it creates this coordinate thing which I can move. So the Z axis would always be the blue one. Y would be the green axis and Z, so I can move it this way. But another way you can do this is to select this and press G. So that's to like grab, and you can like freely move it around your screen. But if you wanna fix it to a certain axis, you can press X. So what happens is now I'm just moving it along the X. And if I press G and then Y, I'm just moving it across the Y. And like G and Z, I'm just moving along the Z. And so it's the same for all the other tools. So like rotate, you can either click here to like have that free rotation, or you can press R and You see, it's just like freeform rotate, or you can press either Z, X, or Y to fix it to a specific axis. And the same for like scaling and transforming. So transforming kind of adds everything to it, which sometimes could be a lot if you have a lot of things on your screen to work with. So we don't really need that. So I'm just gonna click to the selection box. And if you want to delete something, you either press X to delete, or you just press the delete button. But sometimes that doesn't really work. So before we, is everyone good with this, like moving around and such? Because another way you could also move around is with this at the top here. So like if you drag it, you see it starts to do all of that. And before we continue, just so we have some consistency, I'm used to the metric system, but everything I'm going to do here is more in the Imperial. And Blender is by default in the metric system. So what you can do is on this tab on your right, you can click on this little, it's like a cone with a circle. It'll say scene properties. And the units, you can change it from metric to imperial. And the scale just means 1 cube here is 1 foot. But that's a little too large for me, so I'm just gonna do 1 divided by 12. So basically now I think if I did this right, 1 cube here should be 1 inch. But you know, it's, oh, or you know what, I could have just changed this to inches. Yeah, that's it. So great. So now we're gonna go right into the exercises. So I just wanna, I guess, have a consensus here. Do we wanna go do the obstacle course or like the brownie? Anyone have a preference? No? Okay, so let's, you know what, let's mix the two up. So I'm gonna create a very interesting scene for a brownie stroke obstacle course. So let's start with the brownie, I guess. So the first thing we want to have is like the brownie itself. So if you go here to add the top here, so you can add a whole number of things from like meshes to curves, to lights, camera, and even speaker if you want sound effects. But what I'm gonna do here is add a mesh and go to a cube. So basically the cube we had at the beginning. And another a shortcut for that is Shift A, but sometimes just clicking here is like helpful. And whenever you add an object, a little box will appear here that will give you like properties for whatever you just added. So here, like I can adjust from its size to its rotation. So I think a foot is like 2 feet is probably too big for the brownie. So let's just make it 2 inches. So you can just type 2 and it shrinks it down. And then if I click out of it, it disappears. So that's one thing to be aware of, is that once you click out of that little box that comes here, it disappears forever. You can't have it back. And you'd have to use other methods to change things to how you want it to look like. So I'm gonna just click on this cube and zoom in a little. And it's too square for me. So another thing that's useful is this toolbar, which when you press N, it pops up on the side. And so here you kind of have those same tools you have here, but with a little more control. So I want to keep it 2 inches by 2 inches, but let's make it 1 inch tall. So that works. So now we have a cube, but I don't like how it's fixed here. I want to move it up a little. So I'll type G and Z and move it up. to here. So let's move it up a little more to here. So yeah, that's great. And I didn't talk about this much, but this little icon here is called a 3D cursor. So this always defines where the origin for your object would be. And the way you move that is with a shift and right click. So if I shift and right click here, you see that it moves to this spot. And if I had to press shift A and add a, let's say, add a cube, it will form the cube around that origin. So you can move this around to like pinpoint where you want exactly you want things to be. But for now, I don't really need that, so I'll like delete it. And if you want to reset it, you press Shift and C. And so it puts everything back into the center, but it zooms out. And another useful tool that you can use with this is if I drag over all of this and I press the tilde key, is that little squiggly thing next to the 1 button. If you press it and hold it, you see like a few tools will show up. So these are like view controls. So if I select this view selected, it zooms into what I want. So this really helps us if you have a lot of things on the screen, then you can select something and zoom into it in particular. Cool. And so now let's start adding a little detail to this because I don't think the brown is the square. So what we are gonna do is switch from so if you look at the top here, it's an object mode, but we want to edit it. So we'll click on this and switch to edit mode. And you realize that it starts to show all these vertices. And so that's how Blender generally works. So you're editing these vertices, like these points, or faces. And in edit mode, by default, you always have the selection to vertices. So if I click here, realize I'm only able to select vertices. And I can switch it to edges. That's with this tool, so I only select edges. Or I can click here to faces, and I can select faces. Or you can press A to select everything. So now what I want to do is I want to add a little more detail to this square. So I'm going to right click and click subdivide. So then what subdivide does is it separates whatever you have and creates more sections of it. A general rule that I would say is always try to work with as few subdivisions as you can and add more towards the end, because the more subdivisions you have, the finer the detail is going to be, but the more processing work your computer will have to do. So until like you're really at the later stages, try to work with as little cuts as you can, and then later on you add more. So with this, I would say maybe 6 cuts. That's enough. And what smoothness does is it starts to, if I drag on it, it starts to like add some smoothness to it. And I'm just going to add a little so like the brownie looks like it's actually like puffing out and a little round. So then that's fine. So now we have this. And the next thing we're gonna, is everyone okay up until this point?
Sorry, I didn't see where you did the smoothness.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna undo this. So when you right click and subdivide, it's this little tab
Oh, okay.
at the bottom. So I'm gonna make it 6 cuts and let's say 0.15, I guess. These others, I'm not particularly sure what they individually do, but because sometimes as you tweak them, they cause different things, but for now, this setting is fine for us. So we have this, and the next thing I want to do is we want to create the topping. But we want the topping to follow like the chocolates topping on. We want it to follow the brownie as closely as possible. So what we're gonna do is create it out of the brownie. So we're gonna switch to vertex select, that's at the top here. And then the next thing we're gonna do to make things easier for us is if you look at this top right, you have varying, these are like view properties. So I'm gonna switch to X-ray mode. So then what X-ray mode does is it makes the whole object transparent and allows you to select through things. So if I had it off and I drag select, it only selects what's visible to me. But I want to select everything, so I'm going to click this and drag over the entire thing. And so I can look around and I'm going to press on this X to kind of create a flat view and just drag over this. And so I have everything selected. So the next thing we can do is press Shift D. So what Shift D does is it duplicates something, so I can make a copy of it. And by default, when you duplicate, it just makes it like free hanging. It doesn't limit it to anything. But if you press Escape, it puts it back where it was originally. And this step is really important that without clicking anything else, I want you to press P. So what P does is it separates one thing from another. And we want to separate by selection. And so this doesn't seem like it did much, but if you look at the top right, it's created a copy of just that selection on top of the key. So we can move out of object mode, back edit mode, back to object mode and switch X-ray off and click on this one. So what it does is it gives us this. And one quick way to switch between object and edit mode is by clicking tab. So if you click tab, you quickly switch between the two. Okay, so it's everyone at this point up until now. We're all good.
I have one question.
Sure.
When I press Shift T, it didn't work. Is that like specific to like?
Oh, it's Shift D to
D. Oh,
D.
okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Great. So it's Shift D to duplicate it. Then you press Escape to keep it back to where it was, and then press P to separate it, and then you separate it by the selection. And so since we're here, it's really good to be organized in how you work. So you realize that at this top right section, it says cube and cube one. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna double click on this and just call it a brownie. And so it names like the base, the brownie, and I'm gonna double click on this and call it like talking. And so this, the hierarchy is just by name, so it's not making anything more important than the other. But another thing we can do to group them is we can select the topping and control select the brownie and then press M. So what M does is create a new collection. So I'm gonna just call this dessert. I'm like bad with spelling. It's a double S, right? Yes. So then, yeah. So now what this does is I can just turn this off by clicking this I, and it turns everything on and off. So now we have the basis on which we can get everything done. So let's start to add detail to this. So I'm going to click on the topping, and I'm going to go back to edit mode. And so the topping is never going to be static. I mean, from all the photos I looked at. So what we want to start to create is that like the creases around the edge. So one thing that, again, I mentioned before is we want to have as little cuts as possible in the beginning and add the details later. So a tool that can help you do that is this tool here called a loop cut. And so if you click on it and you drag onto your object, you'll see that it starts to create these lines that kind of help you to create your own personalized subdivisions. So by default, it'll always snap to like the center, but you can click and drag it to like reposition it. So I'm just gonna create a whole bunch of these at like random intervals. And I'm just gonna click on it when it's in like drag. So I click and drag. Oop, I don't want that. So Control C, click and drag. And yeah, click and drag all over it. So I'm just making them a little random, just to have it. So a good practice would be that if to um, try and remember, keep these, if you wanted specific settings, is that as you make a loop cut, you keep the settings consistent. But I'm okay with just creating one of these. So I'm done and I'm gonna just minimize this. So now what we're gonna do is move these edges in order to create the like the smooth or like gloopy edges. So I'm gonna click back on my selection tool. This is the arrow at this top left. You can see it. And there, then now we're gonna look at this toolbar here. So an important thing with this toolbar, firstly, is this, which is called proportional editing. So one thing that it helps do is, so if I were to click on this vertex and press G in order to move it, and then press Z, you'd realize that it kind of moves it only that vertex and it keeps every other point stationary. But if we wanted to kind of have this uniform scaling to it, you would turn on proportional editing. And now if I press G, you realize that it's moving everything, which seems like it's wrong. But I just want you to keep dragging your scroll wheel up. And so as you keep dragging it up, you realize that this little circle starts to appear. So basically what this circle is like a radius of influence. So then the larger the circle is, the more things, like as you move this, it like scales it proportionally across the entire circle. So yes, so I'm gonna keep that on, and I don't really need to move this one, so I'm gonna press escape to move out of it. And another thing that's helpful is snapping. So this is like this little magnet here. So what snapping does is it helps you as you're moving something, it helps you snap it onto another thing just to make sure that everything you have is uniform. And so I'm gonna turn that on. And then the next thing is I'm gonna define how it snaps. So for now, it has it in increments. So this would be like in specific dimensions that I'll put in, but I wanted to snap to the face. And I want to click project individual elements, just so like when it has this proportional scaling, everything moves to that face. So I'm gonna turn that on. It's everyone okay up until now? Cool. And so now I'm gonna click out of it. So just because of time and so we have more to work on, I just want us to choose our best two faces. So for me, it's like I've already picked them. It's like this face and this face. So a good practice would be to have the grouping all over. But since I'm only going to render this final view, we're just going to focus on this. So now what I want us to do is pick shift and click on at least 3 points, and then press G to move it. But what I want us to also do is press Z so that it moves like vertically. So what we're gonna do is just move these edges just so it's not like straight, because if we have like a stirrup or whatever it is, it would be like different height. So I'm just pressing G. And because we have snapping on, it's always going to stay to the face of the box at the bottom. So then just have this. So I'm just going to move this around a little bit, I guess. That's a little too high. So don't follow exactly how I may be doing it, but I just try and make it look as random and not necessarily uniform. So all I'm pressing is G and then putting them up and down. So now we want to create the like extensions to like the little pieces that will like droop all the way down. So I'm gonna select again at least 3 of these points and press E. So what E does is it extrudes whatever points we have. And so I'm gonna extrude this to maybe about here and click on it. And then I'm gonna press E again to extrude it downwards. And at this point, I'm gonna press S to at least scale it in, because they kind of, I don't know, they kind of like, at least from the reference image, they kind of narrow as they go. Oops, that was a mistake. They kind of narrow as they go down. And you see, like, because I have proportional editing on, if I scroll up or down, it increases the like range of influence. And so I think about this is fine. So just like pick any edges you want. And so here I'm gonna just pick these two and extrude them down, and then scale it a bit. And then let me move this maybe here, and move this here, and this edge, move it here. And then maybe I want this to go a little lower, and then S. So be random in how you do this, and how you feel like your syrup or topping would be if you were to okay, and let's say these 3 points. So E to extrude it, and you click to stop, E again. And if I wanted to scale it, I'll press S. So yeah, so I'm kind of okay with this. You can always come back and edit this. So is everyone okay with this? You can also just make one group. It's fine. It's just so you know, like you can move all these vertices individually. So I'm gonna press Tab to move out of edit mode to object mode. And you see like it's kind of jagged around the edges, and I don't want that. So I'm gonna right click and choose Shade Smooth. And so the reason why we don't see much of a difference here is because there aren't enough vertices for Blender to know on how to make them smoother. And so one good thing to add at this point would be a modifier. So modifiers are like non-destructive additions onto objects that you made. So if you remember at one point when we're in the edit mode and we did a subdivide, that was destructive for lack of it because it permanently affects it. But if we want to have as little polygons as we want to so that we don't overtask our computers, you can add a modifier. So it's this little wrench at the side here. And so if you click this drop down, there's a whole bunch of modifiers and they all do a whole bunch of different things. But the modifier that we want to use right now is called a subdivision surface, which is here. And so you realize that as soon as I add it, your edges start to look a little smoother. And that's because you've given Blender more points to edit with and make it like smaller. And so there's an advanced setting here, but as you increase the levels, the smoother it gets. So I'm gonna keep it at 3 and let's 4, like 4. Great. And so we are done with that. And so the next thing is like it's not sticking out that much because as you modify it, it's shrinking it down. But one thing we can do at this point is add some thickness to the topping because up until this point, it's just flat. It's like really 2D and flat. So we can add another modifier here, which is the solidify modifier, which is right here. So you go to modifier, solidify. And so now what that does is it adds a thickness to it. But depending on, at the beginning, it will look a little weird just because it uses the default settings. So the first thing I'm gonna change is this offset to 1. So when the offset was -1, it was solidifying it inwards. And now it's solidifying it outwards, but a little too much because of the thickness. So I would say I want it to be maybe about, let's say 4 mm. Oh, wow, that's even big. Did I? Let's say 1 mm. Yeah, so about 1, that's still a little too big. So I'm just gonna scroll down. So just scroll down until it looks right to you. And so yeah, so that's about fine for me. So I did like 0.016. And unlike the collections, so unlike collections, modifiers are stacked in terms of hierarchy. So if I had solidify on top of subdivision, it creates something completely different. But I would say usually it's good to have the subdivision on top because it goes first I subdivide and then I solidify. But I don't know, for some reason here when I switched it, it looked better this way. So you know what, I'll keep it this way. It's fine. But it depends on how it looks like to you. I prefer this look, but just remember that modifiers are always in a hierarchy. So since we are done with that, we're gonna move next to this valley. And and it like sticks out of the topping a bit too much. And if you remember that it created this error once we added the subdivision to the topping. And the settings for this were 4 and 2. And so almost always, if I were to select this, the brownie, and add a subdivision to it, it automatically kind of like, because it creates more points, so it's making it even smoother. So this is fine. It's a little, it creates a gap here that I don't like. So maybe it's because I did, yeah. So I guess it was better for me to do this after all. So then now we are like halfway through, probably. So is everyone okay up until this point? Cool. So then the next thing that we're gonna do is sculpting. So as I said earlier, maybe some of you joined a little later as I can. So Blender has, oh, sorry, I do this often and this is not a good practice. Please save often because Blender does have a tendency to crash if you overwork it. But it's not like it will crash every day, but sometimes it does. So I'm just gonna save this as a thing. And luckily, Blender has an autosave feature. So if you go to File and you click Open Recover, it will always have an autosave and also has a last session. So sometimes if you're working on something and it quits unexpectedly and you open a new file, I'll say probably 9 out of 10 of the times, if you go to last session or autosave, you would get your files back. But still saving is good practice. So now we're gonna sculpt a bit. So I'm gonna click on the topping here. And at the top, we're gonna go to the sculpting view. And oh, it's zoomed out a little too much, so I'm gonna zoom in. So in sculpting, the general premise that the three things I would say are important are this left toolbar here, the settings you get at the top here, and these settings here. Like these two aren't that different. Like this is like a shortened form of this. But in general, these are brushes. So all the blue brushes from draw to crease would almost will add onto what you have. From all the red ones generally subtract. The yellow ones are like modifiers. And then these are the bottom, I call them like extra editing or like tooling effects. So we're gonna go, and an important thing with the brushes is adjusting the radius. So if you drag this, you can increase the radius. Another way to do that is to press F. So once you press F and you move your cursor in and out, you can make the brush larger or smaller. Or you can use the like square brackets. If anyone here is familiar with like Adobe in particular, it's the same command. So if you use the square bracket, so like a square parentheses, it should be next to the P button if you use them, so they increase and decrease accordingly. And on this right side, we have the strength. So the higher the strength, the more the effect the brush should have. And you can edit the direction sometimes, and the hardness and the smoothness. So for this, I'm gonna start with the draw brush. So if I start drawing on these, you see it starts to create little creases. But by default, Blender would always have a symmetry in sculpting just because most people who would sculpt in the beginning would want a symmetric object before like editing later. But you can, that doesn't really help us here. You can turn that off with this little butterfly here. So you see it has the X on for symmetry. So I'm just gonna, like mirror, I'm just gonna turn that off. So now what this does is if I draw something, it's only where I draw it. So I'm gonna draw the top here because I'm assuming that the top wouldn't be completely smooth. It will be a little lumpy. So I just keep this random and have fun with it. And so if you ever overdo something, you can undo. But a great tool for that is the smooth brush. It's kind of like an eraser. And so I'm gonna reduce the strength because it can be a lot sometimes. And if you start to move it on top of the faces, it starts to smooth them out. So like this edge sticks a little out too much for me, so I'm gonna smoothen it and like move it in a little. But this isn't really working well, so I'm gonna click this one, which is elastic deform. So what that does is it's kind of works the same way as like proportional editing. So it just deforms the entire thing elastically, like as the name says. So I'm just gonna move it in a little bit. So that's not, oh, yes, about there. And since we're trying to make this look a little more realistic, I'm gonna add little blobs at the end here, just so it looks like the topping stopping over there, topping stopping. So I'm just gonna like add a little, but sometimes these are hit or miss because it starts to move this out. So I guess maybe the best would be the elastic deform. So if I click here and I drag it out, it starts to pull it out. So I'll say in general, like these brushes, like in your spare time, it's fun to work with these. And for most of the tutorials that I have seen online, you can do a lot with a mouse, but I've also seen people who have like styluses do really particular work because then you can add like the pressure will be based on how much you like press the thing on the screen, but you don't really need to go out and buy a stylus that works with the screen for this. You can do a lot with your mouse. So I think in terms of sculpting, this is enough for me. So we're gonna go back to the layout by clicking here. So now we have kind of this bumpy thing here. So I'm just gonna check in. Is everyone good up until this point? Cool. So now we are gonna sculpt on the brownie itself just a little because this edge is sticking out here and I don't like that. And I want to kind of move this. So I'm gonna click on this and then go back to sculpting. And we're gonna try a few more brushes. So this clay brush, it kind of adds lumps of clay. Oh, why is it doing that? Oh, that's weird. It shouldn't be subtracting from it, but let's go to layer instead. Okay, so well, it I don't know, it overdid it here. So I could undo, but this is where I feel like the smoothing tool comes in helpful. Then you can, why? Okay, so it's not working. It's fine. I'll just undo that. So we'll go back to my trusted elastic deform, which seems to be my favorite tool. I'm just gonna drag this out a little bit. So I'm fine tuning this based on what I've made. So this also really depends on you. So I really want this view when I export it, something around here. So I'm really going to try to make this look as accurate as possible. So that's like filling in the gaps, moving it around. And then this little spot here sticks out, so I'm going to smooth that out, undo, but I'm going to reduce the strength just so it's, that's probably too much. Reduce the strength just so it's much. So yeah, I like this. But then another thing is the brownies, it's not going to be this smooth, it's going to be a little jagged. So one thing we can start to do is roughly like mess up these edges to make it look, have that like crumb-like nature. So I'm gonna click on this draw sharp at first. And what this does is it's kind of like draw, but it rather takes in, but it makes the vertices really like pointy, kind of like as the name says. I'm gonna move this around a little. So like just like rough out the edges just a little bit so it starts to look a little deformed. So we can try other brushes. Let's say this inflates. So what that does is if you keep clicking on something, kind of like puffs it out. And so I can use that here a little bit. So I'm just clicking and like moving in circles. And then boost scrape. Maybe if I really wanted to like, some of these tools, honestly, the brushes, they work really similar to each other, depending on how you use it. And there'll always kind of be a preview here that shows you what the effects you would have is. And so if I click on draw sharp, it creates this preview. Clay, it creates this preview. Scrape, it creates this preview. So I think if I wanted to model, let's say a basketball, and I wanted to like hand model it, I might prefer to use the scrape tool over the draw sharp, just because like with this preview, like how they, so like it depends on what you have to do. So I'm gonna, these edges, I'm just gonna mess them up a little, just so we have that kind of, right. So yeah, so we are all, I'm happy with this. So we're all, maybe not with here. I'm gonna go back to the sculpting and just, smooth this out. Then maybe pull this. There's this really cool tool here called the snake hook. So what it does is it won't really work well with the brownie. Probably I'm gonna go back to probably with here. So I'll go to sculpt mode. So if I click and I probably need more points. So that's like one thing to be aware of. If you have a sculpting, especially, and what you want to do doesn't work, it just means that Blender doesn't have enough points for you to work with. So you either have to go back and like add a subdivision or a subdivide modifier just so you have more points to work with. So, okay, I'm probably overdoing this corner, but I really like my brownie to look as good as I would want it to. Let's drag. Yes, this is fine. Great. So we're gonna go back to the layout view. And again, this looks kind of jagged, but if you click on it and right click and go to shade smooth, it smoothens out all the corners and kind of makes it look um, like a smooth contour. So the next thing we're gonna do is add like some M&Ms to the top here, or Skittles, like whichever is your preference. So we're gonna do a Shift A, and we're gonna add a UV sphere, which is like a mesh. And when you do that, by default, it just makes it so large. So we're gonna go to these settings here and tweak it a little. So what segments does is segments and rings affect this detail on it. But because of how small we're making it, we don't need this many because that would just be overtasking what we wanted to do. So I think probably about 7 should be fine. And radius, let's say 5. So it looks like bad here, but if I make the radius, how small are they? I don't know, let's say 1/16 of an inch. Yeah, so that's small. So it's in here. So if I just wanted to drag it out so I see it, I could, oh, I could just do like 1 inch here. So it starts to come out and let's say 3 inches. Yeah, that's fine. So it's over here. So I'm gonna move to it. And yeah. So now that we have this, I'm gonna click on, I think, X, no, Y here, just so we have it in like a front view. So I'm gonna move to it, zoom into it, and select it, and go to object mode, and then edit, or you could press Shift Tab. And so now that we have it here, like M&Ms are flat. So one easy way we can do that is S to scale. We're gonna press Z to restrict it to the Z axis and just compress it. So like it's about this size. So yeah, that looks good to me. So I'm gonna go back to object mode. And honestly, we could have scaled it without moving to object and to edit mode. And the next thing we can do here is if we right click and shade smooth, it looks kind of bad. But we can fix that once more with a subdivision. And you see, like, if you add it, it already starts to look smoother. So I'm gonna crank this up to, let's see, 3. And so now it looks like it should, how it should be. So I'm gonna duplicate this for Shift D to make a copy and put it around here. But I'm gonna scale it up a bit because all the sprinkles wouldn't be the same size. And do the same thing, Shift D, scale it up again. That's great. And I'm gonna click all of them and press M to make a new collection and call it sprinkles. Or like, I mean, this is not an add of M though. And so we have that. And then now that they're their own collection, like their names are pretty straightforward, but just like I try and get into a habit of naming things so I know exactly what it is. So I'm gonna call this small. Let's call this medium. And let's call this large. Okay, so I guess they're fine. In real life, they might be deformed a little. So if we wanted, we could go to sculpting and like mess with them a little. So we could go back to the sculpt view and like mess with it a little just so it's not completely, they're not all completely, so you click here, sculpt mode, they're not all completely like round, but that's fine, I guess, they're fine. So then a great thing about Blender is its simulations. So it's really amongst, I guess, maybe the next that I'll say compressors like 3ds Max and Maya. But Blender is really good at simulating. So what we want to do is pick these and put them up here. But we don't just want to copy and paste and copy and paste them. So I'm going to press N to hide the little tab at the top. So what we're going to do is add a particle system to this. So I'm going to click on this, and the particles are is this little tab that looks like a circle with 3 connecting circles. So I'm going to click on that and then add a particle system. And so by default, it'll create this large circle, but we don't need that. So we're going to change it from an emitter to hair, and already start to create this mess of like, so what it's just doing for now is it's creating hair strands and just projecting it everywhere. But we can tell Blender to, instead of making these hair strands, we can say duplicate these pebbles. So if you go to the rendered panel here, so right now it's rendering them as paths. But if you render it as a collection, and you scroll down to this instance collection and change it to M&Ms, you see that it already starts to put them everywhere on the top. But they're a little small, so you can scale it up. Okay, that's too much. So I think this is large enough. And honestly, it's a little scary to think about it, but and scale randomness will just change the scale, but we already did that, so we don't need to do that here. And so one cool thing we can do on top of this, so if we click the advanced panel, we can click on rotation. Everyone's here. And so now we can specify how we want the rotation to be like. So instead of velocity here, we change it to the normal. So then what this does is it keeps all of these rotated to the normal of the world, like the scene. So we can randomize this. So like you see that they start to rotate. And what phase randomize does is, so the regular randomize will only randomize it in terms of the normal in which you set. The phase randomize will randomize it in all other locations. So for example, I think when I randomized the normal, it only changed it on the Z, but phase randomize will like randomize it in the X and Y as well. And so, yeah, I think this looks good, but probably too many. So on the emission, you can change the number. So let's say 200, like a healthy dose of M&Ms. So that's fine. And seed just basically randomizes where they start from. So you can adjust this. I think this looks good. So this works, but it's still a little weird. So one thing we can do is tell Blender where to put these particles. And we can use that through a feature called weight painting. So if you go to the top left here, it's called a weight paint. So if you turn that on, by default, everything is blue. And you realize you have a little brush. So if you start clicking and dragging this brush, realize that it creates these red spots to green. So this kind of looks like a temperature map, which it honestly is. So what it does is places that are red would be where we want the sprinkles, M&Ms to show up. And it starts to transition outwards towards blue. So blue would be nothing. So we can, I'm just gonna paint this, but keep it kind of random because it's not gonna be an even distribution all over it. So I think that's fine. I like that. So you'll notice that the particles aren't following that. So the way you can tell the particles to stick to it is if you go to vertex groups at this bottom right. So if you look at my cursor and density, it will have this group here. So then now the surface is telling the particles to follow this. And so now we have them here. So I'm just gonna paint a little more to spread them out. And then back to object mode. And yeah, I'm happy with this. I guess I'm gonna change the scale a little bit because it's too, yeah. You know what, I kind of like it like this. So this is great. So we're honestly kind of done with this in general. So the next thing we're gonna move on to is adding materials to it and colors. So is everyone okay up until this point? Do you need, like, is there anything you want me to clarify or we're all good? You all have your cameras off. Okay, great, awesome. So now we are gonna add some color to this, like we're gonna add materials to it. So let's start with the M&Ms. So I'm gonna click on this. And on the right here, this little circle here that says material properties, I'm gonna click on this and click on new. So then this assigns a material to it, but we can't see them because of the view that we're in. So if you look at this top right, these two views here, so this one and this, so what these do is they are rendered views. So if you add a material to it, so an object, it would be in these views that you see them. And you see like when you switch to them, it starts to look more of this. So I'm gonna switch to the last one. And so there are a lot of settings here, and trust me, you don't need to know all of them. I would say one thing that you should at least you will be editing a lot, is the base color. So if I wanted to make this red, I'll just like crank it down, and you start to see like the color starts to change. So I can make this red. And so then I can go to this. I can add another new material, and let's make this purple. So like this, add a new material and change the base color to, I don't know what work here, like a, yeah, like this line. But, so this is one way of doing it, but there's a way in which we can randomize this, but that it's not too complex, but that's another, it adds a bit more to it. So I'm gonna save that for when we are done with everything else, and then we can come back and see on how we can randomize these colors if we wanted to. So now I'm done with these, so I can go here and turn this layer off. So that's like clicking the like little eyeball next to it, and it hides it, so it's no longer there. So next, I'm gonna I'm gonna go back. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna turn them on. I didn't explain some other things. So another thing, at least in the materials tab, I would say is important is the subsurface color. So what that basically is the reflection of light that you would see if the color you'd see as like light reflects through it. So one tutorial that I was watching, the way he explained it to me is like your skin. You notice that if you put a light towards your skin, it has like a reddish, you start to see like it turns red. So if you were to create a skin tone, that would be what your subsurface color would be. So that's like if you have a translucent material, how that would change. Another thing is roughness. So the rougher you make something, the more chalky it looks, and the less rough you make, the more shiny it looks. So if you look at the red pieces I have here, as I slide this, it starts to have the reflection of the light. So I'm gonna make them just a little shiny. So that's fine. So I can go here and like adjust that as well. But I'm just gonna keep it random. So we have like some shiny elements in here. And there are a few more. If I wanted to make them glass-like, I would turn my transmission all the way to 1. So that would mean like light completely transmits through them, but I don't need that right now, so I'm gonna keep it back as 0. So there's a lot to work with here, and depending on what you want to do, there's a setting. And I would say because of how extensively people use Blender, if you wanted to have a certain setting, you will almost always find someone who's done it and wants to share it to the world. So we're done with this. I'm going to turn this off. So then we're going to go here to the topping. So I'm going to select that. And I'm going to add a new material. I made it brown at first, but right now, honestly, I'm feeling like making it pinkish. So let's just make it pink. So here. And we're gonna, I guess, surface a little shiny. So I'm gonna make it a little metallic. That just like adds some level of shading, but not too much. And I'm gonna crank the roughness down just so it's shiny. And I would change the subsurface color to a darker shade of pink, maybe. Just so like if we edit the lights a little, it would have that difference. And then I guess one thing, I'll just make it a little bit glass-like, like crank the transmission up. You wouldn't see it that much here, but it is changing it. And so there we have a really good, good looking topping. So next is the brownie or cake itself. So we're gonna click on this and the same thing here, we're gonna add a material to it. And let's make this base color, let's say brown. where's brown? It's like here, and then drag this. But oh, I didn't mention a cool thing with this is it follows the hex settings in Adobe and other things. So if you had a specific color you wanted to use, you could type in that particular color here. But for now, I'm just gonna adjust these sliders. And so we are done, I guess. So anything we do from this point on would just be continuing to modify this to make this look even more realistic. So is everyone okay up until this point? Do you have any questions? Cool. So now let's try and add a bit more scenery to this. So I'm gonna click Shift A and add a plane. So it makes it really big, but I don't want it to be this big. Let's say 4 inches. No, 10. Oh, no, 10 is fine. So it makes that. And if in terms of rendering, the camera becomes really important with that. And so if you scroll out and you zoom around, it's like here, this is your camera. So you can adjust what the camera sees by moving this. But another quick way you can do it is this button here, which is the toggle camera view. So if I click this is what the camera sees. But you see it's a little too large for what we need. So you have to press N, and in the views and this toolbar pops up. If you go to view and you click select camera to view, what this does is it adjusts the camera as you move this. So what I'm doing here is just zooming in. So I'm gonna click here and drag this. So I think this view is good enough for me. Yeah, yeah, this view is good. So I'm gonna unclick that, press N to hide this, and then switch out. So you see it's moved my camera here. So that's a weird thing that I found with Blender, because with most other programs, as you move your view, the camera moves with it. But with Blender, you have to specify that I want to move the camera. So I'm just gonna keep editing things in this view. So here. So I'm gonna scale this up just so it covers it. And now a cool thing we can do is paint the levels of, let's say this was we had a layer of chocolate, then we had a layer of like cake, then we had, let's say, I don't know, caramel or something. We can paint that, or we can put an image onto it. And so one way you can do that is if you go back to the material settings here, and you click this, the yellow circle, and I think with Max it will be probably orange or something. And you click image texture, it will turn black. And so what that does is you can tell Blender to put a specific image here. So let's say if I were to open and let's say I were to go to pictures, right? What kind of pictures? And let's say I drew this little corgi here. If I wanted to apply that corgi to this, you see like it puts, oh, it looks sad, but it starts to put it onto this. So that's one way in which you can apply a material to something. So if you already have it, but another way is that you can paint it yourself, which will probably work better for us. So I'm gonna delete that and create a new one. And I'm just gonna call this layer and then click OK. So now it still stays brown like this because I haven't done anything to it. So we're gonna just click to this UV editing tab that's at the top here. And we're not gonna do much here except just press A And as soon as you press A, you see like the left side changes. So what Blender has basically done is it's unfolded the brownie. So if you were to fold it back, these were like the coordinate systems that it would use. So that's all we need. So I'm just gonna go back to, and we're not gonna change anything else here. So we're just gonna switch to texture paints. And we're gonna zoom in. So now it's everything here is black and light gray, but we're gonna switch to one of these views here at the top. So if I click on this tab and I press N, see it creates this, it brings this brush dialog box here. If I were to pick this, like, let's say this brown color here, and start painting here, you'd realize that it starts to match what I'm painting here onto the, I'm just gonna quickly go onto it, the brownie. And so if I wanted to create, so you can paint here or here. So I want to switch this color. So I switch here. I'm gonna crank this up and let's say choose this darker color of brown. So now if I start to paint here, so you see it starts to map it here. So I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna go all the way around, but just because of what we need and what we need to show. So this brush is a little too big. So it's the same thing, the square brackets, or I can adjust the radius here. So I'm just gonna paint my second layer here. And let's say my third layer down here. Cool. So yeah, this looks good, I guess. And if I really wanted to get specific, I can try and create like faint transitions here. So all I'll do is reduce the strength. And so when I paint, it's just like a lighter color of it. So it kind of looks like, I guess how it would in real life, that it's not like just a consistent color. And just paint around it. If there's too much. Just paint around this. So yeah, I think we're done. And I'm just gonna go back. It looks a little weird, but you know, I like it. So yeah, we are done making this. Cool. So everything we've done up until now has been static. So we can pause here and then we can just talk on if we, so from here on, because with the tutorial, I just focused on modeling, we can talk a little bit on animation if we want to, or we can go straight into how to export or like to render this out. So which would you prefer? Anyone's good.
We can animate.
Okay, cool. So you know what? Let's just keep adding crazy stuff to this. So I'm gonna press Shift A again and add a plane. I'm gonna make this really small. So G and Z. So I'm gonna move this up. So let's say we wanted it to rain over this. And we wanted it to rain more M&Ms just because like this is an ad for them. They're gonna make it rain a lot of M&Ms. So with this selected, I'm gonna go to particles, add, and it's gonna be an emitter, but here I'm gonna switch to render to collection, and then and then collection instance to M&M. So if you press the space button, I don't know if you notice it, it's a little too small for me, but let me scale it up. If you press the space button, it's like raining M&Ms all over the place. And I'm gonna scale them up even more. Let's switch to this view just so my computer is not doing a lot. and press space again. And so like it's raining M&Ms. I wish this like reminds you of that movie. Like what was it, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, I think. So what we can do now is we can talk about physics. So right now, I said Blender has built-in physics that are pretty well made and work with the real world. So one thing that we can do is we can add a collision, or we can tell it that if anything hits the surface, it should bounce off it. So if you go to physics and you add a collision, and you can edit these. I think this is okay for one for the plane. And then on top of this, I'm gonna add a collision, that's physics collision, but I'm gonna make it very sticky. Like let's say 8. So now if I go back to this view and press play, you see that as the M&Ms fall, the ones that hit here like bounce off it. It's a little slow, mostly because I'm sharing my screen and doing this, but on your computers you should see that it's kind of sticking to the topping as well as bouncing off the plane. So that's one way to do animation. So I would say like there's the simulated ones in which you tell Blender to do something, but then there's also the manual, as I'll call it. So let's turn this off. Where did I put it? Let's turn this plane off. We don't need that. So let's say you wanted to move. Let's create a ball. So let's kind of recreate the little obstacle course that I sent. So let's make this radius a little bigger. And we can increase the segments. Let's say 20 and 10. And I'm gonna just you know what, I'm just gonna scale this down. Whatever I want it to be. So it's big. So G and C. So there's one way in which we can animate this, that is manually. So if you drag this bottom part up, this is your timeline. So what you can do is you can key certain, it's not responding. Yeah, this is some of the things that happen. And I haven't saved in a while. Fun. But yeah, this tends to happen. It's fine. I have duplicates of this if this doesn't work. Oh, it's back. So I have learned my lesson and I will save this. So there's one way in which we can animate this. Let's see smooth. There's one way in which we can animate this ball. So here from time, we're gonna switch it to already, yeah, it's already in a timeline. So what we can do is anytime you press I, it will say insert a keyframe menu. So what these are is just that then you can insert a keyframe or a transformation based on one of these. So what I want to do now is transform this, and I wanted to register the location, rotation, and scale. So if I click on this, it creates a keyframe at 0. So let's say I drag this to 10. I don't know why it's being slow. Oh, fun. Okay. It's probably because I'm sharing my screen and trying to do all of this at the same time. So what I'll do, there's a lot on this screen, like in this file right now. So yeah, sometimes. So That's fine. Okay, but so while I wait for this, does anyone have any questions and or comments on how to do something? How much time do we have? Oh, we have about 30 minutes. That's a lot. So no, I'm gonna just pause quit this because I don't want to wait. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just gonna reopen Blender with a new screen. And, okay, we are back. So I'm just gonna go back to the general view. So now we don't have a lot on the screen, so this is gonna probably be easier to animate. So there, so in terms of how I went on how to animate, there are two ways in which we can make it. So it's simulations, that's like the physics within Blender or manual. So with this cube, let's just duplicate it. So you can save and open a new, or you can create this to the side. So I'm gonna just duplicate this and scale this down. So one thing is called let's the shift A, add a plane and make this big. So I'm gonna add a collision to this. I just click here and click on this and add another collision. But if I want to make this act like a real world body, I'll make it a rigid body and I'll keep this active. And here you can change the massing and the collision here. I'm going to change it to mesh. Just so if anything collides, it's colliding with this mesh. And then I'm going to make this also a rigid body, but keep it passive. So like an active body would move and a passive body would be stationary. So if I click on this and I press play, see like it falls, but it passed through this, which is a little weird for me. But if you see like it, I think because I didn't make this a rigid body, so I'm just gonna do that. And so let's like, for example, I didn't make this passive and I made this active. One weird thing is that it just like flies away. So I'm gonna make this passive. So now hopefully, yes. So with this, you can make this work on its own. So, and another way is manually animate. So if you had like, if anyone here is like into character design and you wanted to animate certain objects, you'd most likely manually animate each individual movement. So let's go to Shift A and add a UV sphere. Gonna move this here and scale it down. So let's say I wanted it to move from here to this side. So again, I'm gonna make this larger. And so you see like as you drop this timeline, the cube follows this timeline. So you see like as I drag this, oh, by the way, gotta move it to, oh, there it is. So what I can do is, so from 0, let's say I'm gonna move this to 30. Let's say by the time I want this to hit this 30 point, I want this sphere to move to, let's say, this region. So I'm gonna press G and move it here. But now that I've moved it here, I'm gonna press I and press location, rotation, scale. So if I go back here and press play, oh, that didn't really work. Okay, maybe let me try it. I again and Q, put it here and press I. Okay, now it works. I don't know why. Oh, so I guess the reason why it didn't work is that it didn't register the starting point. So now you see like I have manually selected how I wanted to move. And so with the obstacle course video that I sent, I manually like moved the ball from like one position to another. And in terms of animation, one thing that I would say to be aware of is normally with videos, they are made in 24 frames per second. So basically 24 frames here would translate to 1 second. So this movement I made here is like less than a second. So you can change that if you don't want to have, because like the longer you also make a timeline, the more tasking will be on your computer. So unless like you have a really strong like and powerful like graphics card or something. So one shortcut that I saw someone did was if you click on output properties, and for here right now the output is set to PNG. So if I change that to movie, so let's say AVGPEG, and you see this frame rate here, you can customize it. So I can say 10 frames per second, which will make it look kind of jittered, honestly, if I were to render it out. But then what that just means that this is 1 second, this is 2, this is 3, 4, and so on. Great. And another cool thing with physics here is force fields. So force fields are, they kind of work how they are trying to. So this vortex, so I did a shift add in the vortex. Where is it? I'm gonna move this up. Yeah, so it has this like squiggly, this curves on it. I'm gonna move this here and move it, let's say, right underneath this square. So now if we press play, it's not strong enough to affect it but if I click on it and go to physics and I crank the strength all the way up, and if I press play, see it's starting to affect it. So it's starting to spin around. So if I even crank the strength all the way up, it like, so that's another way to do it. So yeah, so I would say in general, the manual form of animating looks tedious, but sometimes I guess for beginning, it's probably the easiest way to go about things, that instead of asking Blender to do it, unless like you want to create specific objects, you can do this. And just for addition, I don't know why Blender has this cool thing. So if you go to mesh monkey, it always has this like cute little monkey that it like adds to it. So if you like wanted to liven up your screen, so let's say I wanted this monkey to like nod a little, I'm just gonna add this. I'm gonna rotate it like this way. Press I, rotation scale, here, rotate this way, press I, rotation scale. So now when I play, it's gonna take a while, but it's like moving its head. But yeah, that's one way to work with the animations. Does anyone have any other questions?
I'm gonna have to rewatch this entire thing.
Oh yeah,
Follow
sorry.
along again.
I feel like I don't know if I went too fast. Maybe.
No,
but
it's just like I'm used to Rhino and that interface, so I have to get used to this.
yeah. So that was one struggle I had I don't know if anyone's familiar with any other tools, but um, every program has their own way of working. But the cool thing about Blender is you can import objects. So if you want to work from, so Rhino mostly works in NURBS, but Blender is in meshes. So if you want to work, you just have to export it as an OBJ. So if you go to import, you can import STL files and OBJ files and then work with it. But since we are here and we have a little bit of time, let me see. This is just okay. I'm gonna be brave and open back the brownie, and I'm not gonna save. Hopefully it doesn't crash. Okay, great. So we have a bit of time, so we're gonna just learn how to render these objects out. So I'm gonna delete all the other things that make things difficult and switch to this. So Blender has two inbuilt rendering engines. If we click on render properties, and I'm gonna switch back to this view. Um, I lost this. So I'm gonna go back to properties, open, workshop and files, perfect browning texture. Okay, cool. So I have this. So Blender has two render engines. So before we do that, let me add a material to what is plain. So as much as I was adding these, Blender also has built-in materials. So I can add a checker texture and it kind of makes this checker and I can, yeah, I think I like this size. So Blender has two built-in render engines. There's Eevee and then Workbench and Cycle. So Workbench is basically this view that we're working on, and Eevee is this that open. But the thing is, Cycles is generally better if you want to create things that are more lifelike, but it's just more tasking to your computer. So for now, we're just gonna work with cycles and learning how to use that just because we have the time. So if we switch to cycles, you start to see it starts to look a whole lot better. And I probably should have fixed this a little bit, but it's fine, you know. But it's a little noisy. But before we get on to how to fix the noise, one thing that if you're in cycles, if you have the option, you should switch to a GPU compute. Like not everyone might have it depending on what computer you're working on. But if you switch to that, it just made it much better because doing this with the GPU is better than the CPU. And then on to this called view layer properties and turn denoising data on. And so if you ever want to render anything, you click on this tab and click render image. So then what it does is it just renders what image you have at the scene. And depending on how much detail you have, the longer it would take. So then it starts to add all the stuff to it. And it will be the same for an animation. If you had an animation, you'd go to render the render animation instead of the image, and then it would render it frame by frame. So then one good thing I would say is if you want to save on time, if you have, let's say, 400 frames in your video, maybe it would be best to, there's a way to set it so maybe you export maybe 50 frames at a time, and then maybe in Premiere or Photoshop, you stitch them together. So then, yeah, it's gonna add this, and then it starts to look, maybe here could have been a little better. so it's fine, you know. So, any questions up until this point? Is everyone good? How are your brownies looking? Yeah. I'm always open if you want to make appointments to like talk through things and yeah, to help because it's it's especially if it's your first time, it might be oh we have a little and then there. It might be it will be difficult first getting used to the interface and then having to do something in it. But then trust me, if after this, if we were to go through a second time, it would be much easier. So yeah, we have this. I could have hidden that, but it's fine. So yeah, we're done. And if I zoom in, you see there's a little bit of noise here. So a way we can fix that is if we close this, and this starts to get into probably higher level. Well, not super high level, but it's so you click on this compositing tab and you click use nodes. So I don't know if anyone programs here as in CS, but someone told me that this is pretty similar to how you map one section to another. So we want to, and we're going to change this here to an image editor and switch this to render results. So we have brownie here. So I realize this, we have a lot of noise here. So I can tap Shift A and search for denoise. And I'm gonna connect noisy image to image, denoise normal to normal, albedo to albedo, and then image to image. So you wouldn't see the difference right away, but sometimes you just have to disconnect it and reconnect it. And don't feel any, and you realize that it has gotten rid of all of that. But it pixelates it a bit, but it looks much better than it did before. So that's one way if you wanted to clean up your image. So let's say if you've spent your hours sculpting and you render and it kind of looks weird, you can go in and tweak things. But yeah, this is the brownie. Cool. So we have about 14 minutes left. And if you wanted to save your image, so just go back to compositing and image save. And I'm just going to call this B. So we have that saved. And we can open it later and go to Photoshop or Lightroom or anything and then edit it afterwards. But yeah, I don't know, that's what I had. And right now, if anyone has any questions or anything in particular, but I've been having a lot of fun with this. Like this morning, I was eating Cheerios, and then I just made like a bowl of Cheerios while prepping for this because I was like, no, why not? Why shouldn't I? But I don't know. I changed them to Fruity Loops later on, and I think I have a thing for food these days. I don't know why. But you can make as much as you want and be totally experimental with it. And I was making a ring, like all the pieces. But I would say the more you practice with it, definitely the better you get. And one thing is also time. Like as much as improving